Hello, my name is Nicholas Junker, and this is Module 8, Legal Aspects of Teacher Evaluation for EDL 851. We looked at 4 articles discussing teacher evaluation and the changes it has endured over the last 10 to 15 years, and issues providing for authentic and valid teacher evaluation. First article we looked at was teacher evaluation lawsuits and issues in the court system. There are a variety of lawsuits going on from Florida to Minnesota to Kansas to pretty much all over the nation regarding teacher evaluation, tenure, all of those things. The main 2 areas in which lawsuits have been occurred are authority, procedure, and pay, and then issues with data and the concerns that the validity brings. In terms of authority, procedure, and pay, there were a variety of suits discussing merit-based pay, and those had some issues in terms of school-wide growth formula, how they were measuring it, how they were handling merit-based pay, and they were concerned that inhibited their ability to collectively bargain. Obviously, other issues, and one of the main issues, especially in Kansas, is tenure. And that has been a big issue in Kansas, and then in California, and then most recently Minnesota. And they have had that issue, and it mostly has been depending upon the political bent of the day, kind of however it goes. In Kansas, obviously, is much more conservative, and so it is leaned that way and got rid of teacher tenure. But in other places that are maybe a little bit more liberal, they have sided with the union and workers. Another issue, especially has been in Kansas and across the nation, is also the loss of due process. When you get fired, or if you feel like you have an unjust action against you as a school employee, typically you would have a procedure that would be in place where you could, handle those issues. But that has not been the case, and there have been lawsuits filed for those reasons. Also, impositions of a new evaluation system. And this is kind of more of a administrative issue because a specific Department of Education pushed for a new evaluation system without the help or knowledge of any of the groups involved. The data issues and concerns were mostly with how the data was factored and how it was figured out and issued. There was use of school-wide growth formulas that were challenged, flat or incomplete data that was challenged, contextual factors that weren't really factored into some of the evaluation issues, and then always something that has always been interesting to me is the subjectivity and inaccuracy that can come with just regular people always doing the evaluations. The second article we looked at was teacher evaluation and issue overview. The main focus, as it established right away, is the teacher evaluation is for the purpose of growing teachers. It is not for getting rid of bad teachers or pushing. It is for pushing teachers, but not pushing teachers to leaps and bounds for competition. It is about the growth of the evaluation tools as a whole. One of the things I focused on was the importance of the growth for what your needs are. Whether your state, your local, your district, whatever your needs are, that evaluation tool needs to fit that. And as we know in the past, and one of the things it focused on as well was that the big harbinger or big thing that's been used is classroom observation. And that is still typically seen today, and I think it'll continue to be seen in the future. And an aspect of that observation is the use of checklists or rubrics. I know in my evaluation, which I will discuss later, there's a considerable amount of checklists and rubrics and standards that are important to the evaluation system. And throughout this time of teacher evaluation, especially as the ebbs and flows, that pendulum goes back and forth on how to educate your kids best, change is inevitable. And I think that's one of the things that's important. And one of the main reasons the change is inevitable today is through the Race to the Top initiative from the federal government that pretty much frees up $4.3 billion to schools if they would possibly put in place evaluation systems that were more effective, so to speak. And also philanthropy from guys like Bill Gates and others that want to push for teacher development and overall student development. And one of the things that they focus on specifically with evaluation is focus on student achievement. They think that would be a somewhat of a more accurate barometer as long as it is done appropriately and effectively. And something that I didn't think that would be okay, maybe it's just because of my political bent, is that most teachers unions are open to evaluation. Um, and I think that's something that is different and difficult because it's always that, as I prefaced there in the last bullet, it's a political football. Unions versus conservative legislatures, and this has been going on for a considerable amount of time, especially the last 10 to 15 years, um, and it's important. And so the next article that we looked at, it was considerably longer. It was the NEA guidance on establishing an effective model for evaluation. And these are some of the things that they talked about. One of the most important things is that the NEA is committed to change. I think that that's important because you need to have all stakeholders involved, whether it's policymakers, the union, teachers, students, taxpayers, everybody needs to be involved. And one of the things I think that they focused on, and I focused on as well, is that it's got to work for you. One of the reasons it's important is it's got to work at the local level for you to be able to have actual growth in your system. And also one of the things that they focused on in the article is that evaluation is not the end-all be-all of observation. There needs to be a multifaceted approach where you can conduct business as a whole part of a learning experience for an educator. Kind of a more fine-tuned points of it were that you need to make sure that your evaluation tools are valid, and so you need to have multiple data points as you go on to make sure that you're effectively challenging and evaluating your teachers. And it also should be a multi-pronged tool. It shouldn't just be classroom observation. It should also be walkthroughs and peer reviews and professional development, and those things are part of that whole picture of teacher evaluation. I like this quote. I thought that was important. I picked that out, and it just says, the core purpose of teacher assessment and evaluation should be to improve the knowledge, skills, dispositions, and classroom practices of professional educators. Because as we've seen from all previous studies, that good teachers can make a dramatic impact on a student's life learning and future prospects. And like I said this before at the beginning of the video, all articles have pretty much said that they need to focus on the development of teachers, not on weeding out bad teachers. And I think that's where the concern from the union comes from. Continuing on that, these are the 6 basic principles of developing an effective evaluation system. I've already kind of talked about that before, so I don't really need to hash out each one. But it needs to be valid. It needs to have multiple data points. It needs to be, one of the things that I didn't touch on before, but it is now, is it needs to be transparent. Teachers don't like to be surprised. They want to know what's expected from them, and they want to be able to do that. And in knowing what's expected of them, they need to be involved in collaborating with administrators and state legislatures and taxpayers, and cultivating and building that evaluation tool, because they're the ones that are skilled in education, so they know what goes on in the classroom. Some final thoughts and suggestions from the NEA, and this has been the subject of some lawsuits as well, is the use of value-added models when appropriate. This has been challenged throughout the legislature when applicable, but it is also a dramatic issue when it comes to cultivating and possibly dealing with issues of student achievement, and student achievement as a harbinger for cultivating that data for evaluation. And as I prefaced before, evaluation needs to be multifaceted, a variety of tools and methods. And one of the things that they focused on was that it is important to always pilot before attaching any personnel decisions. You need to try something out and attempt to make sure it's valid, fair, and achieves accountability and growth for your teachers. The last article that we looked at was teacher evaluation measures and systems. And I thought is kind of a piece here that was important, that kind of was a catch-all be-all of this aspect. It says a successful evaluation system should create linked and integrated systems which tie evaluation procedures to curricular standards, professional development activities, targeted support, and human capital decisions. I think that's that first piece there is important, and it kind of focuses on making sure that the entire evaluation system is tied together. You work with You need to work with taxpayers, administrators, all involved, so you can cultivate an effective measurement and system to where you can cultivate effective teaching and learning. One of the things I focused on was constantly improving teaching and learning, as that is our end all be all. The purpose of schools is to cultivate that learning aspect out of students. One of the things I focus on is to make sure that your evaluation procedures and protocol are reliable and valid, because if the process is flawed, the evaluation data and validity will be at issue. One of the things I also talked about was human error is a concern, obviously. The subjectivity of any person doing an evaluation could be different than another person doing an evaluation. They have different expectations, different needs, different thoughts about education, and that's important. And evaluation needs to create multiple data points, as I prefaced before. It's not just one piece or portion of a reflection of an observation. It's student achievement, student artifacts, responses to growth measures, professional development. Those are all aspects of teacher evaluation that are important. So looking at my teacher evaluation system through my district is USD 224. We've adopted the KEEP model, which is what the KSDE recommendation is. Starts out the first piece as self-assessment and goals. When we do our self-assessment and goals at the beginning of the year, you go through a rubric, and where you can rate yourself on specific aspects such as content, knowledge, pedagogy, those types of things. And then you also select different standards through that. When those pieces will be your goals, and that will be what you're trying to drive your teaching towards, that best practice, so to speak. And then when you get closer to the actual observation process, you have a pre-observation meeting. You'll set up a time. You'll discuss your lesson, what your objectives are for the lesson, what you're doing, what you're trying to achieve, what aspects you're trying to get your students to learn, what your student expectations are, those types of things. And then we come to the aspect of the formal observation, where you conduct a lesson. The administrator will write down as best possible in the most objective and unbiased way what occurred. He will view student engagement, student achievement, what's going on in the classroom, the differing pedagogies that are employed, and then if you need to, as a teacher, you can also add artifacts and give them to the administrator at that time, or submit them at a later date. So after your observation, you'll have a post-observation meeting, which was typically set up prior to your actual observation. It's a debriefing. It is going over and talking about what happened. If you felt the lesson was successful, if you felt that there was accurate growth, student achievement, those types of things. And then you're going to talk about your successes and your opportunities for improvement. Not every lesson is successful, so there may be issues there, but it could have just been a lesson that went fantastic and you could be fine with those issues. But you also may look at some ideas of professional development that would possibly meet some of those needs for those steps to improvement. And then finally, after your both observations that you would have had, which in our district, if you're a teacher in your first 3 years in the district, you are observed twice, once first semester and once second semester. And after that second observation, your supervisor will provide summative ratings, determine if you are going to be renewed, and it will determine your overall effectiveness as an educator going forward as you go. And if necessary, you will provide for a development plan or possibly non-renewal or whatever the results may be. The question about inaccurate evaluation and unjust dismissal, I've actually had a pretty lengthy conversation with my administrator about this lately, and because of the attitude of the state of Kansas about tenure and due process, and because those things don't exist, there's not a lot of recourse for inaccurate evaluations or unjust dismissals. In our KEEP system, you can comment on pieces of your evaluation. That doesn't mean that they will change the result. There's not an independent arbiter. There's not a grievance process. There's the evaluation he wrote, and you can respond in the comments box. One of the things that we have in our district, which I would assume would be similar in other districts as well, is you may also enter a written explanation to the record that would be included in your file. It has to be done within 2 weeks of you being shown your evaluation, but it's just your words if you feel that you were misrepresented, but that doesn't actually impact your actual evaluation. And in terms of unjust dismissal, teachers are covered under basic discrimination, employment, OSHA laws, but other than that, there's really no protection that exists outside of that. And that's why some of those court cases we found are kind of important. The court case I chose was Lee Walker versus New York City Department of Education. I'm a government teacher by trade, and so I thought this was a very important case. The facts behind the case are Lee Walker was teaching a lesson about the Central Park Five and the issue where there were 5 gentlemen accused of rape. They were African American, and so they believed, and she believed, that people rushed to judgment in this case. And that's how she taught her lesson, and she was observed during this lesson. And after the lesson, the administrator said that she needs to offer a quote-unquote more balanced lesson. She did not agree with that at that time, but there was really no other issues after that lesson. At the end of the year, she was non-renewed. Walker does believe that she was non-renewed due to this issue, and so she challenged the New York City Department of Education, claiming that her First Amendment right of freedom of speech was violated. And in this case, they found for the New York City Department of Education because they felt that she did not have a vested interest or ability to have free speech. The exact language is she did not speak as a citizen addressing matters of public concern. She was working for the school, and because she was working for the school, her speech was not protected in the way that it would be as a normal citizen in this matter. And so they found for the Department of Education. Some final thoughts about legal issues is basic: involve all your stakeholders. I think the best thing is working with. You can never go wrong with working with as many people as you can, finding what best works for you, finding what works for your local community, your state, and building that trust. And so that way, if there is issues, you can hopefully combat those in a collaborative way. And that kind of follows along with my second point. There is total transparency. Teachers like to know what's expected. Unions like to know what's expected. Taxpayers like to know what's going on. And so if you can evaluate and put forth all of those things that you're doing, you'll be better off. And thirdly, you need to build a professional network. It kind of goes with number one, is developing that that institutional memory. Theoretically, is that if others have done it before and they've had issues before, or they don't have issues, find out what's best practice and do what they do. I think that's one of the things that's most important. Also is keep up to date on current research. There are a vast amount of resources all over the internet and academic journals that you can keep up to date on those things. One of the things, and it focused on a lot of the articles, is keep in mind evaluation is for growth. It is for the development of teachers, not for sorting teachers. It is about growing your school, growing your students, and growing your staff overall. And also it's important, this is one of the things I've talked to my administrator about, cultivate a relationship with your Board of Education, and even your state Board of Education. And that way you can have, if there are legal issues at bay, you can talk, you can discuss, and you can figure that out. And then finally, my last point is you can't go wrong with using the best research data. If you're doing what is considered best practice, most of the time, as long as you do that in a collaborative way, using a multifaceted approach, which I detail here, you'll be fine. And as long as you're keeping the best interests of students, staff, and your school community overall. My administrator has a saying, he said, as long as you're doing what's best for students, I will support you. And I think that is where I focus as well. And here is my works cited, and this is the end of my video. Thank you for watching.